Joining us now on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline is Chip Brown, a man who is in the heart of Texas, and he is kind of ingesting all of this Big 12 talk with a burnt orange lens, if you will. Chip, welcome back to BYU Sports Nation.
BYU Sports Nation. What's going on?
Man, we want to know what's going on in Texas. First of all, when you hear the words Big 12 expansion, what happens to your body?
I reach for the tongue, and start chugging. Especially this one. I mean, this one has just some "are you kidding me" facets to it in terms of, it really being about TV revenue and trying to execute a clause in the Big 12 TV partners contract that calls for an equal share of revenue for any school added. And there's no question that the Big 12 presidents and chancellors were presented with data that shows that if they had done nothing in 12 years, they would be $20 million per school behind the Big Ten and SEC in television revenue. And I think that hits schools like Iowa State, Kansas State, West Virginia, obviously harder than Texas and maybe Oklahoma, but still, it hits everybody. I mean, it's an arms race, and Texas is a central figure in this thing for a lot of reasons, because it's got a lot of cachet and brand recognition, but they're anchored in that Big 12 by their deal with ESPN for the Longhorn Network. And that was ESPN's plan. I mean, everyone's like, oh, that's a disaster. They should get out of the contract. Well, ESPN made it to 2030, staggered from the Tier 1 and Tier 2 deals that are over in 25 to keep Texas in the Big 12, because the contract for that third-tier network is graduated. Right now it's $10 million. It averages $15 million. The big money is in the back end of that contract. So unless ESPN says, you know what, we're good, which they never will, because they want Texas to stay in the Big 12, this is where we are.
There's so much to wrap your arms around in all of this conversation. Articles coming out related to ESPN and Fox, saying they might not be happy with what's going on. What impact do you think the TV rights holders will have on expansion in the Big 12, Chip?
Well, from what I'm hearing, ESPN, I think, would be supportive of BYU going to the Big 12, because obviously ESPN operates BYU's network, and they could, consolidate. I hear Fox would be happy with Houston or Cincinnati, because Fox doesn't have great college football presence in Houston or Cincinnati. And so, if it was just that, everything would be fine, right? It'd be BYU and Cincinnati, move on, be done. But then there's the elephant in the room, which is the University of Houston. And I knew the second that the Big 12 presidents and chancellors voted to actively evaluate 2 to 4 expansion candidates, that the political muscle in the state of Texas from Houston, which includes the governor and the lieutenant governor, we're going to be all over Texas to make sure that Houston got into the Big 12. And that's how politics is played in Texas. That's how Baylor got into the Big 12 in 1996. The lieutenant governor, Bob Bullock, was a Baylor grad. The Senate Higher Education Committee chairman was a Baylor grad, and they basically muscled, Baylor into the Big 12 ahead of Houston. On paper, Houston should have been the school that was added in 96, but that's not how it went because of the politics.
Chip Brown with us, writer for HornsDigest.com. on BYU Sports Nation discussing Big 12 expansion. This is, it is wild. So because of the political clout and muscle that's being flexed in favor of Houston, and David Boren having gone on record in the past saying that he'd be interested in Cincinnati and BYU, how do you see all of this shaking out, Chip? Is it going to be a 2-team expansion or a 4-team expansion?
That's the million-dollar question. I think the majority of you need a super majority for expansion. You need 8 votes of 10. The simple majority, I think, would be in favor of BYU and Cincinnati. And I think there are some in Texas who feel like, okay, we tried, but you've got a new president and a new chancellor at Texas. They are getting pressure from the governor and the lieutenant governor, who obviously have a say over their budget in the legislature. And I think they are feeling compelled to try to get Houston into the Big 12. And so I think that is the only thing holding this up right now, is the debate between 2 versus 4. Okay, Texas, if we help you get Houston in, what are you willing to give? And the TV partners are trying to figure out 2 versus 4. That is literally what is going on right now. And if it's 2, I think, if they're going to play ball with Texas and Houston is one of them, then it's going to come down to, Boren and everyone else picking probably either or Cincinnati or BYU. If it's 4, I think it's, Houston, Cincinnati, BYU, and probably right now Memphis, because FedEx is really stepping up on behalf of Memphis from, saying that they would sponsor the new Big 12 title game that comes back in 2017 to, I'm hearing, even fronting, the television revenue for Memphis so that they don't have to take any share for a year or 2.
Wow.
That's the kind of wheeling and dealing that's going on and creates a bit of a wild card for that 4th position if they expand by 4. I'm talking to people who I think are aligned with OU and probably the simple majority of the conference that would be willing to go to 4. And then there's Texas, which I think is trying to, not make this thing look like it's just a money grab, and are the candidates being talked about worthy? And, you can make arguments for Memphis, and UConn gives you the New York, Northeast television market to a degree, and then Orlando, Central Florida, largest TV market without a pro team. You can make all those arguments, but right now I think if it was 4, it would be BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and Memphis. So, but again, is it going to be 2 or is it going to be 4?
The $20 million question, in fact, per year. Chip, who has more influence in what happens here? Texas or, say, ESPN and Fox or somebody else?
A lot of it's going to depend on, what are you willing to say about the future? What are you looking to stay in the Big 12? And I think everyone's got to read each other on that. That's where the TV partners are gonna probably ask for something, an extension of television rights, an extension of grant of rights, something to assure that if they throw out a bunch of money that they're going to get something on the back end. And that's another thing that I've been told, Texas would be leery of, because if you expand and let's say the candidates don't flourish in football and it looks like a watered down version of the Big 12 or a puffed up version of the American Athletic Conference, then those who have other Power 5 options will probably take them.
Chip Brown, writer for HornsDigest.com, with us on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. I mean, you have a good idea of the pulse of Texas Longhorn athletics in general. How do they view BYU? Do they want BYU in the Big 12 when they compare BYU to all of the other expansion candidates?
I think there was a time where they absolutely wanted BYU. I mean, I think it goes back to 2010, and I remember the first conversation I had because, I was involved in that story back then, and every conversation involved BYU. And then there were, BYU got hesitant, and probably rightfully so, because the Big 12 was teetering, and they held together after the summer of 2010, but then A&M and Missouri bolted in 11, and it looked like the Big 12 could collapse again, and then they end up adding West Virginia and TCU. So you got new players, and I think that helps. BYU, honestly, I mean, the new players at Texas are wild cards. Greg Fenves, the school president, and Admiral William McCraven, the chancellor, who was the head of special operations in our country, oversaw the raid on Osama bin Laden. These are new players in this discussion. So we're all trying to read it. We're all trying to figure out where Greg Fenves is on this. And that's, another big variable in this.
How about Oklahoma? They seem to be playing a little tug of war, and maybe this is historical with Texas in terms of, hey, we have a voice here too. What's the relationship like between Oklahoma and Texas when it comes to the power plays made in the conference?
Well, it used to be great, obviously. I mean, Texas and Oklahoma formed the Big 12 back in '96. Athletic directors Donnie Duncan at OU and DeLoss Dodds at Texas. And it was always great until DeLoss Dodds left and Steve Patterson came in, and Patterson completely ignored the relationship with Oklahoma. And I think that's when David Boren really started, really getting into the pulpit and sounding, his thoughts and desires. And now Greg Fenves is trying to patch that relationship up at a time where, the conference's future is in the balance. So it's like, hi, nice to meet you. Let's get to know each other really well, because we got this really big decision we got to come up with here that, may make or break the Big 12. So I think it's a relationship where both sides have been willing to, put in the effort to meet halfway. But there's no question that David Boren wants Texas to meet halfway now, because everyone is beholden to Texas. In terms of happiness, and that's a tricky deal for David Boren, because he didn't get the Longhorn Network money. He didn't. Texas is the only one who got that, and they're the only ones who will ever get a deal like that for a third tier. For third tier content. I mean, that's $15 million a year is what Notre Dame was being paid by NBC for its football games when the Longhorn Network was done. I mean, think about that. So I think that's what David Boren is looking for. If we're going to help you, Texas, with Houston, what are you willing to give? Are you willing to extend something? TV rights, grant of rights, to show that you'll stay in the Big 12. I mean, the Longhorn Network contract runs through 2030. It might not seem like such a stretch to extend some rights at least to 2030, but all the Power 5, Tier 1 and 2 deals are coming up, right around 24. And I think everyone wants to be nimble because Netflix is coming and Amazon's coming and everybody's trying to read the direction of media rights in this country. And so everybody's trying to stay nimble.
Chip, it's been great to talk to you again. This is just a crazy, very fluid situation, and I know a lot of BYU fans are hoping that we have future conversations with you as co-members of the Big 12.
Well, and I said something on my radio show where I was talking about driving through the mountains to get to Provo, and here's how much of an idiot I am. I actually drove to Park City and then came down through the Wasatch Mountains. So I'm like, oh, it's beautiful, all these mountains. So I should not have talked about the drive to Provo because obviously from Salt Lake there's an interstate that takes you right there.
It happens,
But I love Park City. I love the Wasatch Mountains. It's beautiful.
And nothing wrong with taking the scenic route, Chip.
BYU's hoping to take the scenic route to the Big 12.
That's right. That's right.
Chip, thanks for the time, man.
Thanks, guys.